Okay. Well, my name is Deborah Danuser, and I am a first-year PhD student here at Pitt, focusing on science communication. But what you guys would be more interested in is I spent 10 plus years working in the private sector doing public relations. I graduated from the University of North Dakota with my undergraduate. Let's not put a year on there. A couple years later, I got my master's, and then I moved to Washington, D.C. to do an internship with Edelman, which is the largest independent PR firm. If you know anything about PR firms, it's what I like to call one of the big boys. While it's independent, meaning it's not publicly traded, it's owned by a family. It competes with like the Ogilvies, the Ketchums, the Porter Novellis, the ones that are owned by holding companies and publicly traded. I worked there for about 4 or 5 months interning, and it was a great experience. Loved Washington, D.C., started looking for full-time work, and my first real job, I guess you could say, that wasn't an internship. I was the marketing and communications specialist at Easter Seals, working on a project called Agribility, which is helping farmers and ranchers with disabilities. And it was a partnership with the Cooperative Extension Service, which is actually part of USDA, so it's a public-private partnership. I did that for about a year. Decided it wasn't the right fit for me because I realized in that particular job, I was the only communication person for this project. The staff was about 10 people on this project. Most of them were actually in Wisconsin. There's only 2 of us on staff in DC. In the Easter Seals office had more staff than that, but on the project there's just 2 of us, and I was the only person doing communication. So I felt very isolated, and I wanted to get back into either a larger department or back into agency life. Worked at a marketing firm for a little while, and then somebody I knew decided to start her own PR agency, and somehow she talked me into joining her. Actually, it was about 90 days after her official start date. I was her first hire, and I stayed there for 8+ years until I decided to go back to school. The agency I worked at is called JPA Health Communications. It specializes in, obviously, health communication. So all of our clients have a health care aspect to it in some way, shape, or form. We did a lot of work with nonprofit organizations like the Melanoma Research Foundation, Cancer Support Community, Lamaze International. We also did work with pharmaceutical companies ranging from Bristol Myers Squibb to Sanofi to more startup companies like Chiasma and little biotech ones that you probably haven't heard of. Then we did a little bit of work with the government as well. For example, we worked with one of the NIH centers, National Institutes of Health. If I start throwing acronyms at you, just pause and say, I don't know what that means, because that's something, as soon as you get into a field, and especially in agencies, you abbreviate everything. So just let me know if you have any questions. So that's a little bit of my career background. I prefer to do this a little bit more Q&A instead of me just talking at you and spelling a life bio and your eyes glazing over. So what do you guys want to know about working in public relations? And specifically, I can answer questions about agency life and my understanding of versus in what things are like working in-house. Because pretty much if you go into PR, you either do agency or in-house communication. Mm-hmm.
My best friend right now is working with Ward Right Communications in downtown Pittsburgh, and they are a PR agency. Mm-hmm. And I guess I would like to know what the difference is, because I'm doing an internship where I'm doing a lot of in-house PR and kind of stuff like that. And what's the difference between agency? Because I know what I'm doing, what he's doing is very different. Mm-hmm. Things and the way everything is run is very different. So
in a lot of ways, it's similar as any other thing where you kind of have agency or firm versus in-house, say with like law, you can be in-house counsel or work for a law firm. It's the same fundamentals apply, but how you approach them and who you do it for changes. If you're in-house, generally speaking, you're going to be part of a smaller team, or you might be just one or two people. You know, you could be a communications department of one, and some people love that. I realized for me that wasn't a good fit. I liked being able to bounce ideas off other people who had studied communication instead of trying to explain it and then see if they liked the idea, or then be able to then more critically say like, well, what if you tried this instead? And so whereas agency, you know, 80–90% of the employees are communication specialists in some way, shape, or form. You have a little bit of administrative staff, so that's why I don't say 100%. And then with agencies, people come to you and hire you to do the communication work. So you could spend all your time on one particular client, or you could spend your day working on 5 different clients in one day. It varies. One of the interesting things about agency life is because you have different clients, it's an opportunity to learn new things. So while at JPA we were specialized in health, I dealt with issues ranging from oncology to caregiver needs and care, to counterfeit drugs, to healthy birth practices, to, we actually had a client that at first we're like, wait, why are you talking to us? We do healthcare, public road safety. And the reason why was because they were looking at it as a public health issue, because traffic and related deaths are a leading cause of death worldwide. So just like people try to, you know, there's the idea of conceptualizing gun violence as a public health issue, they were conceptualizing traffic safety as a public health issue. So then as soon as we saw that, we're like, oh, that's interesting. Okay, give us the RFP, which is request for proposal. And that's kind of how you bid for work. Yes.
So what was your day like? Like, what do you mean? Like, what do you do on a daily basis?
And that's one of the brilliant things about agency life is there's routine, but yet you never quite know what you're going to do.
Okay. Was it an office job? Was it more like a going out? You know what I mean? Like that kind of stuff.
There's a combination, and it all depends on what level you're at. Generally speaking, you have junior, mid, and senior level staff. Junior staff doesn't travel nearly as much. I'd say mid and senior level starts traveling a little bit more. I did have the opportunity to go to like Paris and Montreal, New York, and Chicago on business trips. Usually those were doing events. And that's actually one thing I wanted to share with you guys. That kind of reminds me. Something that you probably don't realize, but that actually plays a surprising role in PR is event management. So if you guys ever have the opportunity to help run an event, be like, I don't know if that's the giggle of I've done that.
Oh no, I have an event tomorrow. That's just
you know, because I would routinely call up the contracting and sales departments of hotels to get bids and say, we want to hold an event. We will need about 20 sleeping rooms and meeting room that will hold 10 people. And we have a max budget of about $100 a meal, which sounds like a lot, but I tell you that is not. Because that has to also include the gratuities and the service fees. And so then you're only talking maybe $70. And if that's an evening meal and drinks are included in that, that's tough. And something that, you know, it's not just a matter of, well, can the client afford it? Sometimes it's an issue of perception too. Like pharmaceutical companies, there's a lot of external pressure on them, you know, because you probably heard about scandals of, you know, doctors being taken out to 4-course or 4-star, 5-course dining meals and things like that. So there's a perception that you need to make sure you're not giving them extravagant gifts. So for a lot of our events, we work with what we call patient advocates. So these are people that are involved often with nonprofit groups, like maybe the executive director of a cancer charity. And we bring them together and ask them, like, tell us, what do you hear from the patients as unmet needs? For example, we did this with one of our clients with a type of leukemia. And one of the things that they were telling us was there's a lot of misunderstanding or not understanding the importance of medication adherence. This particular type of cancer you treated with an oral medication, so they took pills. Well, there was a lot of side effects, and so people would decide, like, well, going on vacation, I'm going to stop taking my meds for the week because I don't want to have upset stomach. Well, when you start doing that, it starts affecting the efficacy of the treatment, and you're more likely to have a reoccurrence or flare-up of the cancer. So explaining to people why it's important to not take medication holidays. That was something we developed a video and transcribed it into like 4 or 5 different languages, because this was a European group. So you kind of never know what you're going to do. You're going to do a lot of writing. I would encourage you to take as many writing classes that focus on different types of writing. I mean, press releases, you're going to write a lot of those. Blog posts, Twitter posts, also fact sheets, photo captions. But probably the one that would probably be surprising to hear that would be helpful, I would encourage you to become experts in Microsoft Suite. Because that's going to be the resource you have at your disposal. And you're going to be making table tents, you're going to be making name tags, you're going to be mocking up a sketch to give to a graphic designer and say, make this pretty. And also, if you have a chance, I don't know if it's how easy that is here at Pitt, to maybe take like a visual communication class or a graphic design class. I'm not saying become graphic designers, but having that background to be able to speak the same language with the graphic designer helps. Quite often, I actually manage our in-house graphic designer, and one of the reasons was because I understood a little bit about printing processes. So like, oh, is this CMYK versus Pantone? Or I look at something and I'm like, I think you need a little bit more white space here. Or I was able to talk in a way with her, not just make that less columny, which was once a feedback she actually got from another staff member, just make that less columny. So that has actually served me quite well. And then being able to make Microsoft do what you want and not what it wants to do. Every job I've ever had, I've become the person that they're like, how do I make Microsoft stop changing this? Or, it keeps putting a line break in. How do I make that go away? Because in PR, especially agency life, your job is the details. Nobody wants to pay for a press release with a typo or that isn't clearly articulating your point in an efficient manner. So, or likewise, they're not hiring you to run a meeting in Montreal and come in and there's no pens on the table, the room's cold, and the AD doesn't work. Those are all your responsibilities, and you need to know how to problem solve very quickly. Because like I said, otherwise they're like, why am I paying you for this? And you'll find a lot of people think they can write press releases. It's because everyone, to a degree, learns how to write. There's a fundamental misbelief that, oh, well, I can sit down and you just have to write, this is what happened, and they get to the press and then they'll pick it up. A lot more complicated than that. you have to craft it in a way, and with us, we always had to make sure we were staying true to the science, so we're not over promoting the results of the study, or there's always politics involved. Like with Lamaze, there's a kind of divide between the OBGYNs and midwives, and Lamaze is often stuck in the middle. So helping them keep that middle road, because a lot of them will work close, a lot of the Lamaze instructors work closely with OBGYNs or in a hospital setting, but they also work with independent midwives that aren't necessarily like the nurse midwives, and so they have to be able to make sure that they're putting information out in a way that just says, this is what the best science says, which sometimes goes counter to what both parties say. I don't know, is this insightful, I hope? What other questions do you have for me?
I know a lot of companies like to describe themselves as marketing and communications or marketing and PR. Is there a difference between the two? Like, does PR do a lot more than marketing or communications does? Like, is there a lot of gray area, or can there be
A huge amount of gray area. And it's something, to be honest, that I think everybody struggles with. Sometimes it's easier to say, oh, well, that's advertising versus PR, because it comes down to, well, are you paying for it? Are you paying for that space or that airtime or whatever? Marketing, it gets a lot more gray, and I wish I could give you a definitive answer. This has always been my sense, and it's not the most articulate. Marketing, in many ways, to me, I think is extremely focused on the bottom line, increasing sales, increasing profitability. PR and the communication will sometimes look a little bit more at the interactions and the quality of the relationships that are being built with people. That said, I am not naive or stupid. The bottom line is a huge, important factor. If communication didn't benefit the bottom line, there wouldn't be the industry that exists today. But
I had it explained to me is marketing is make the sale, and PR and communications is how you feel about
Yeah.
the sale. You want to feel good about it.
mm-hmm. Or you're like, you know what, I'm not going to buy it, but I'm going to tell my friend they should think about buying it.
Or in 5 years.
Or 5 years. It's about the relationships. Yeah, that's another good way to say it. It's kind of a hard thing to articulate, and sometimes you start getting into it and you're like, well, that kind of feels like more marketing.
Yeah.
And a lot of times from the C-suite or the executive positions, they don't differentiate. So there's a lot of companies that have communication under marketing, which sometimes creates a tension. I was actually just talking with a former colleague who worked at me at the agency, and then went to go do in-house media relations for a medical society. And she was talking about how their digital platforms, like the Twitter and Facebook and things like that, was being run through marketing. And she's trying to get it pulled out from marketing and put under communication. Because especially like with the medical society, you're not selling, it's not like selling Coke.
Yeah.
What she's looking to do is advance the science and awareness of what the latest research says about A1C levels, which has to do with being diabetic. So, yeah.
I was gonna say, I'm on a marketing team, but like, even though I'm considered marketing, there's like one person who, like, we're trying to get people to like participate in an event and donate money, and she does all the like donate money stuff, and I do all the, hey, like this is the event, and we get people to know about it.
Mm-hmm.
So like, that's why I was like, I think that's the distinction. Like, she's more marketing, and I'm more like, like I do the Twitter, I do the Facebook,
Right.
so I do like all of the nice communicating, and then she's like, give us money.
But on the flip side of that, we have edited many donation letters for nonprofit organizations, because it's important to speak in one voice. While I had a professor that would always be like, multiple messages, multiple media. You want to get your information out as many different channels as you can, and have people hear it as many times as possible. But you have to make sure that you're targeting and tailoring that information. It's not giving people conflicting information or messages. So whether they hear it on television, radio, read it in the paper, or see it on Facebook, they should know what your call to action is using similar language.
So for someone who has recently graduated college and is looking to get into the PR world, is it like, what's the best way for them to get their foot in the door? Like, look for larger PR agencies or maybe something smaller, like someone who doesn't really have.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm a little biased, I will own it, that I think agency internships can be a great opportunity to get your feet wet and see if you kind of like what you like and what you don't like. You might not like the fast pace. In-house, it might be a little bit more 9 to 5-ish, where agency, sometimes you're doing a 40-hour week, sometimes you're doing a 60-hour week. It depends on what's going on, what does the client need, are you traveling, and are you short-staffed? So, in that way, I think it's kind of nice, and I hate to say it, agency likes agency experience, so if you're leaning towards maybe doing agency, I would try to get an internship. Don't underestimate the value of internships, and even in-house ones. My first experience was actually at my alma mater's PR department. I was a student writer and public relations assistant, and so I would write press releases for the university. And I started doing that between my sophomore and junior year of undergrad, and did that for 2 years. And that was actually my work study job. I got paid to write press releases. In fact, I remember one of the first press releases I ever wrote was the honorary doctorate the university was giving out for that last spring commencement. And I'm like, you realize I've only taken like 2 writing classes. So my other advice is make peace with the red pen. It's your friend, actually, because you will get something back that's just inked up, and use that as a learning experience. Instead of just like, wow, I did poorly. It's like, oh, this is how I can be better. And if you ever do like exchange stuff and track changes, don't just hit accept all. Work your way through each one and ask yourself, how is this making it better? Or is it just making it different? Sometimes edits you get are just trying to make it different because that's what the person's used to. But a good mentor and boss makes it better, and you need to learn to recognize why is that better. And if you want to look for, like, get to know the different agencies, there's a couple trade publications that will actually do rankings of agencies based off geography, into their specialties, as well as revenue. So Wires is a great resource, and Holmes Report and PR Week. Those are probably 3 of the more major trades in public relations. So
you can access those for free on campus too. There might be a paywall on campus.
yeah, and Wires, a lot of, like, I think the rankings are free on Wires. Might be with Holmes Report too. Not sure about PR Week. That's the one that's expensive of the 3. PR Week is the one that's always trying to make money off of you.
Yeah, I know Business Week and Ad Week, if I would try to read a link from home, they try to make me pay, but if I'm in my office here on campus, it's free. So I think they're connected. I'm not sure.
I'm blanking on who the parent company is for PR paid market media.
That's who owns Business Week, so we should have that.
Yeah, I think that's who owns PR Week. because I actually used to submit our agency. I do some of the marketing for our agency, so I worked with the trades and submit pitch op-eds or here's our rankings, and I did a lot of award submissions too. I think when we left, we were upper 70s. In our 8 years, we had won more than 70 awards from different competitions. Some of them nice. I was like, yes! Like we were finalists for small agency of the year for PR Week one year. And that I felt pretty good that week. Yes.
So you did a lot of PR in DC, and that's after graduation, that's a market that I would really like to move to. So can you talk about your experience living in DC, working in DC, the DC atmosphere, what that's all about?
Well, DC is a town where inevitably everything eventually comes back to the government in some way, shape, or form. Like our pharmaceutical companies, a lot of them were based in New Jersey or New York, but they'd have a DC office. And sometimes we'd work with their DC office to do events on the Hill. If you also ever have the opportunity to do a Hill internship, I'd encourage that because people love that. DC people love to see that on the resume. When I moved out there, I joined PRSA. Are you guys familiar with that?
We've been trying to get a student group there, but it's difficult. They're very strict.
Yeah. So PRSA, I was a member of the National Capital Chapter, I think it's NCC. There's also the Washington Women in Public Relations is a networking group. Obviously, it almost exclusively women, but there are actually men that go to the events and that are active in it. It's a networking group. So if you were become a member, you might get a but they're like, okay. And it was incredibly supportive, and they actually would do like speed networking events where instead of speed dating, you need to get to know one, and so you just start making connections. And I think they were also looking at building like a more official mentoring program. So there's opportunities there for like the more formal networking. And then there's a lot of trade associations that are based in the Washington, D.C. area. In fact, National Communication Association is in Virginia, one of the suburbs. I forget if they're in Arlington or Alexandria. So there is in-house communication opportunities there. So that's where I'm kind of like, just because if you're not interested in agency life, there's still a lot of in-house opportunities there because you have the trade associations, because people want to be close to the government, or it's cheaper than being in New York. You know, it's one of the major markets, so there's prestige, I guess you could say, to that. What else can I tell you?
I'm sorry, I have to step out for the phone call. Don't touch on whether grad school is a necessity yet.
Okay, I will give you my opinion. Let me stress that word. I got my master's, but I did it because I felt there was more I wanted to learn. When you get out into job hunting, in communication, doing in-house PR or agency, they don't care. Some might view it as a plus, other people will view it as you're overqualified. It will not place you higher than the person coming out with an undergraduate degree. You're at the same level. You're both just coming out of school. They're interested in the practical experience. Yes.
So would you say that as, students who are almost about to graduate, should we be more concerned about, or not concerned, but should we be thinking more about experience and getting more experience, or pursuing higher education?
if you're wanting to go out and get a job, if that's your priority, is starting your career, I would say experience. Like I said, when I was a senior, starting my senior year, I was like, I feel like there's so much more I want to learn. So the decision to get my master's in communication was a personal decision. I didn't do it thinking it would advance my career. It was, there's more I want to learn. And maybe if all things being equal, they were like, sure, we'll hire the person with the master's. But I was aware that, generally speaking, it doesn't earn you extra. Most people don't look at it and give you brownie points for getting your master's. In fact, some people would argue if you're going to get a graduate degree, maybe an MBA would be more practical. From business, because people seem to have a more appreciation for what an MBA brings to a career than just a general MA. But I don't regret getting my master's. It was definitely the right choice for me, and I learned a lot. But it wasn't a strong competitive edge. So, but if you're interested in academia, or you, like me, when I was in my master's program, I was working as a teaching assistant. I was surprised by how much I liked it. So I put the idea of becoming a college professor in my back pocket. And so having my master's was great because I already, took the right step towards getting into a PhD program, which 13 years later I did. So I feel kind of guilty sitting in, the cathedral of learning and saying, it might not be worth it.
Well,
but
especially you have to do the debt to benefit ratio. Right? How much student debt we it's good to be pragmatic.
Yeah.
Say looking down the barrel.
What would you say, like, the average salary for a PR person would be kind of in that area? How much do they make?
Ooh, tough question. It depends on the market. Depends on if you're doing agency. A nonprofit's not going to pay you as much as an agency. Generally speaking, because nonprofits are notoriously and often rightfully so have to be extremely conscious of their budget. That said, there are excellent opportunities with nonprofits, so I don't want to scare you away from that. I think, like in the DC market, coming out, probably upper 20s, lower 30s, depending on what type of experience you have and where but like agencies sometimes can be quick to promote, in our agency, we had close to 10 different job titles. So you started out as an account coordinator, and then generally speaking, 6 months to a year, you became an assistant account executive, then account executive, then a senior account executive, then account supervisor, then account director, then vice president, senior vice president, executive vice president, and then principal or managing director. That was the hierarchy at my agency. So you can move up pretty, in a couple years, you can be an SAE pulling in easily 10 to 15 more than what you started at. PR Week does an annual salary questionnaire and survey. Sometimes it's behind the paywall, but as you try to access it from here, then they'll actually look at it by the different regions and experience level. They'll give you a range of between $5,000 to $10,000. But yeah, it's always the hard part when job hunting is trying to figure out salary, because generally speaking, people don't publish it. They don't say this, and you try They're like, oh, so what do you think for compensation? I've tried turning it around, saying like, well, what do you think would be added, fair compensation for someone with my level of experience? They're like, no, give us a number.
They want you to low ball.
Yeah, they want a number and they want a low ball.
If you have a friend, especially for women, they always have a low ball.
Yeah.
Right? It's gonna happen. Ask a guy. Ask another woman at the agency when you don't know what she makes. Make friends with a guy. See what he makes. Go from there.
And you don't be afraid to come in at the high end of what you want, because they're going to come in at the low end, and then it's negotiating. I personally hate it. But you have to do it.
Yeah, looking up online in several different sources, probably.
Yes, I just know PR Week right offhand, because we get the emails from them asking me to complete the survey. And I would always do it because I'm like, well, if and when I go back on the job market, I would like to know what I should ask for.
And another way that you can look at salary is look at average rent prices for the area where you want to live, and assume that rent is going to be 40% of what you make, generally speaking. And then figure in, it should be 30, but
yeah, sometimes that's hard.
It's hard, right? And especially if you're just starting out, no more than 40% of what you're making should go to your rent. You've got all your other bills, your student loans, if you've got any, your car, or subway, or whatever. You can sort of reverse engineer what you need to live.
And then, depending on the gig too, like for the first 5 years I lived out in DC, I had a part-time job. It started out because you can't live off an intern salary, at least not in DC. But they were also very much, they're like, we're not going to pay you, or you're not going to work more than 40 hours a week because we don't want to pay you overtime. So I got a job working at a bookstore, a couple nights a week and on weekends. And it was actually great. I met tons of my friends through that. So don't be afraid to hustle those first couple of years too. And then it got to the point where I was no longer dependent on the money. And, career-wise, I'm like, actually, I like the idea of having 2-day weekends. Yeah, I think I can try that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know, especially with PR, it's like for a lot of places you don't necessarily have set hours because you could be constantly working a weekend or something like that. But how do you know if you're kind of being taken advantage of, like going above and beyond, but not getting those rewards,
So again, I'm going to couch this in agency life because that's what I have the most experience in. Your supervisor doesn't like what I had called the straight eights, where you work 8 hours and you're gone. She wanted to see the 8.5 hours a day. It wasn't required, but to her that was indicating you were serious about your career. It wasn't, I've done my time and I'm gone. So working 40 to 50 hour weeks, pretty normal. A good employer and agency, if you're having to work weekends, like especially if it's because there's a major project coming up or the event itself is on the weekend, will give you comp time. So, for example, I had to go to the American Society of Clinical Oncology's annual meeting in Chicago, which is this massive medical convention. I mean, like 100,000 people. It's just huge. And I was working Saturday and I think I flew back on Sunday. So my boss was like, okay, in the next 3 weeks you can have day off. So I got 8 hours of comp time. to make up for the 12, hours or so that I worked on the weekend. If they're asking you to put in like week after week, month after month, 50 to 60 hours, they're kind of taking advantage of you. Unless you feel you're being well compensated. And it's hard to gauge. I mean, sometimes you also have to look at what you're billing. I mean, agency life, you bill, generally speaking, by the hour. So at my level, I think I billed $200 an hour. So you could always work a little bit there and be like, well, you're wanting me to be 100% billable. So I'm having to bill at least 40 hours a week at $200 an hour. How much of that am I getting back? And use that as you should probably be getting, a third to half. I mean, because they want to make a profit, and there's benefits and etc. But sometimes it's depressing when you figure out the pay per hour, the salary has.
I never look up what I make per hour based on how many hours a week.
Yeah. And sometimes it's just good to get a sense of, make friends with other people in different agencies. If your agency's expecting a 50-hour week all the time, and you're making the same as somebody that's putting in the 45-hour week, it might be worth asking or trying to negotiate a raise or another day off or things along that lines. I feel like I'm doing a little bit of do as I say, not as I do, because I was terrible about doing things like that, but you have to be your own advocate in any job or situation. Nobody else is going to look out for you. You have to do it yourself.
We're at about time. Thanks very much for coming in today. I
Oh.
appreciate it.
Hope you found it interesting at least.
And inevitably, in about 6 hours, she'll be like, why didn't I ask this? You pass on to me.
Or I'll be like, oh, I didn't tell them about this.
The same
So,
thing, I can be a conduit.
I'm usually up on the 11th floor if you ever have any questions. Just pop on in. I'm hanging out in the Bolton.